The Phoenix program, created by the CIA in 1967, was aimed at neutralizing through assassination, kidnapping, and torture the civilian infrastructure that supported the Viet Cong insurgency in South Vietnam. It was a terrifying final solution that violated the Geneva Conventions. The Phoenix program's civilian targets of assassination were Viet Cong tax collectors, supply officers, political cadre, local military officials, and suspected sympathizers. Faulty intelligence often led to the murder of innocent civilians. Rival Vietnamese would report their enemies as VC in order for U.S. troops to kill them. In 1971, William Colby, head of the CIA in Vietnam, testified the number killed was 20,000. South Vietnamese government figures were 40,000 dead. CIA officer Ted Shackley managed 600 military and 50 CIA liaison officers who were working with South Vietnamese officers in 44 provinces. Ted Shackley and Robert Comer played key roles in recruiting Phoenix program personnel. Many covert action officers were Cuban refugees from the Bay of Pigs fiasco. They ran the CIA's counter-terror teams, which were in fact assassination squads. Colby, Comer, and Shackley reported to the Director of Central Intelligence, Richard Helms, and the White House. From the beginning, the Phoenix program was conceived by the White House and supported by the CIA. Phoenix called for neutralizing 1,800 targets a month. About one-third of VC targeted for arrest were summarily executed. Green Berets and Navy SEALs would assassinate suspected VC sympathizers or cadre, as well as South Vietnamese collaborators and double agents. In 1982, an ex-Phoenix operative revealed that sometimes orders were given to kill U.S. military personnel who were considered security risks. He suspects the orders came not from division, but from a higher authority, such as the CIA or the Office of Naval Intelligence. The following testimony of Vincent Okamoto, combat officer lieutenant in Vietnam in 1968 and recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award conferred by the U.S. Army, wounded 3 times. Quote, "The problem was, how do you find the people on the blacklist? It's not like you had their address and telephone number. The normal procedure would be to go into a village and just grab someone and say, 'Where's when so-and-so?' Half the time the people were so afraid they would say anything. Then a Phoenix team would take the informant, put a sandbag over his head, poke out 2 holes so he could see, put como wire around his neck like a long leash, and walk him through the village and say, 'When we go by Wynn's house, scratch your head.' Then that night Phoenix would come back, knock on the door, and say, 'April Fool, motherfucker.' Whoever answered the door would get wasted. As far as they were concerned, whoever answered was a communist, including family members. Sometimes they'd come back to camp with ears to prove that they killed people." Penetrations into the Viet Cong infrastructure were accomplished by blackmailing or terrorizing a member of a targeted individual's family to gather information. Every Vietnamese 15 and over had to register and carry an identity card. These records were computerized and evolved into a highly computerized and statistical means of generating 1,800 names a month for the target list and coordinating this information on suspects from 30,000 plus informants. When the Strategic Hamlet program failed, CIA and military intelligence concentrated on the Phoenix program, a terror campaign aimed at the civilian population. Instead of winning hearts and minds, using the threat of assassination and a state of terror to defeat the North Vietnamese. Many non-political Vietnamese were arrested and tortured and in effect forced into the resistance army. Phoenix program architect Robert Comer, after leaving the Pentagon, said, quote, "I would have done a lot of things differently and been more cautious about getting us involved." He called the war a strategic disaster which cost us 57,000 lives and $500 billion. The Vietnam War was the formative experience for a generation of CIA and military intelligence personnel involved in the Phoenix program. They viewed the military defeat in Vietnam as a betrayal on the home front, a loss of will by domestic political enemies, not a military failure against a nationalistic revolution fought as a guerrilla war. The Phoenix program, assassinating suspected VC sympathizers in a systematic manner, worked well and is the blueprint for the current black operation targeting thousands of loyal Americans using state-of-the-art microwave and radio frequency radiation weapons. The motivation to suppress domestic dissidents and to assassinate loyal American opposition stems from the perception of dissent against the war as treason. This philosophy is stated very clearly in the Mind War paper written by NSA General Michael Aquino. The Department of Defense has a huge stake in futuristic technology that kills by ionizing and non-ionizing radiation, leaving little or no trace. The indiscriminate killing of the Phoenix program continues on American soil. The terms soft kill, slow kill, and silent kill refer to the new way of killing the enemy in conflicts short of war and the small wars of the future. The counterinsurgency doctrine has now been applied to the home front so that the perceived betrayal of the military in Vietnam will not be repeated. The generation of CIA and military intelligence led by Shackley, Helms, Casey, Singlab, Secord, John B. Alexander, Michael Aquino, Paul Vallely, and others have built the perfect beast, using selective assassination that leaves no trace. The ability to cull the human herd with silent kill technology allows a few personalities to remake the entire society in their own image. Extremely low frequency technology slowly drives the target crazy with silent sound, similar to the CIA MKUltra psychiatrist Ewan Cameron's psychic driving technique used to break down the target's personality. The new buzzwords at the Pentagon are synthetic telepathy and psychotronics. Another means of attack on targets is the Smirnov patent that uses subliminal suggestion to manipulate human behavior. This patent was purchased by the remote viewing company Scitech Corporation. Military intelligence officers involved in developing these non-lethal weapons include Alexander, Aquino, Puthoff, and others, also control Scitech. Emotional manipulation is accomplished using Dr. Michael Persinger's work to remotely project emotional states that the brain entrains or locks onto and emulates. One can broadcast rage or fear at an individual target to manipulate and control them. As if these methods were not enough to torture and murder people, add to this nightmarish toolbox active gang stalking. CIA-created cults and other cause-oriented groups are used to induce further trauma in the target by actively harassing them in public in a neutralization technique described in counterintelligence operations manuals that are aimed at enemy agents. In the race to develop a new weapon, it has always been necessary to test it on human beings. Perfecting the latest weapons designed to kill slowly and silently, as well as perfecting the process of controlling the human mind, are no different. Once the weaponry has been perfected on these few thousand people, the same techniques will be applied en masse to the general population, and then to humanity as a whole. To understand the new Phoenix program, it is necessary to begin at the beginning of U.S. government human experimentation, the Manhattan Project. At dawn on July 16, 1945, the Trinity site witnessed the detonation of the device codenamed Gadget. The remaining two devices, named Little Boy and Fat Man, were used on Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and 9th, killing approximately 200,000 people. World War II terror bombing of civilians began with the London Blitz, killing 30,000 people, and culminated in the firebombing of Dresden, Germany, and Tokyo. Napalm was used in 1,000 plane raids that incinerated approximately 200,000 people. The atomic bomb did not add to the scale of mass murder of civilian populations, but it certainly made it more efficient. Many of the scientists were appalled at the result. Some had urged a demonstration shot. The scientists declared publicly that the U.S. possessed only a few years' head start before another nation followed suit. Many of the scientists and some generals advocated international control and the eventual banning of nuclear weapons. Those that tried to head off a nuclear arms race in the end failed, as events and personalities took on a momentum of their own. Edward Teller advocated the super heavy, the hydrogen bomb. Oppenheimer objected to the development of the hydrogen bomb and stated that these were genocidal weapons. He was promptly replaced. Teller assumed the scientific leadership of the weapons program and remained influential for the entire Cold War. The largest hydrogen bomb ever tested by the U.S. was around 40 megatons, 2,000 times more powerful than the 20-kiloton Hiroshima bomb. The nuclear arms race that followed has resulted in the doctrine of MAD, mutually assured destruction. If either the U.S. or USSR launched any or all of their half of the 20,000 nuclear weapons they have aimed at each other, then they can rest assured that they too would be completely destroyed in a retaliatory strike. The nuclear arms race consumed much of the wealth of the U.S., leaving the civilian population living in the very real fear that the world could end in a matter of minutes. In 1943, the first human test subjects would be used without their knowledge or consent. American citizens and hospitals began to receive plutonium or other forms of radiation treatments that had no therapeutic value. All of the experiments were conducted for the express purpose of answering the unknowns. How much radiation could kill a man? Could blood tests detect exposure? Are there treatments for exposure? Long before radiological warfare was used on enemy populations in war, it was purposely tested on American civilians. By 1945, the war was over, but these questions remained unanswered, and the experiments would continue in secret for the next 30 years. The School of Aviation Medicine in San Antonio, Texas, quietly began to do the test for the Air Force. Military officials did not object to the use of cancer patients, but many of these people were not very ill or had been misdiagnosed. Several of the people injected with plutonium had been diagnosed as having cancer when they did not. Many of the others were not cancer patients, but suffered from illnesses such as hemophilia, scleroderma, or Cushing's disease. These errors were repeated in the total body irradiation experiments that were sponsored by the military. Many of the cancer patients had been well enough to work and live normally. A lethal dose of radiation is 350 rad. After doses of 100 to 2,000 rad, many patients died within days or weeks from radiation poisoning. Those that lived were often debilitated and in constant pain. Nazi scientists were employed at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio and involved in these lethal experiments. These were just a few of the thousands of Nazi scientists who had secretly been smuggled into the U.S. under Operation Paperclip to help the U.S. destroy the USSR. Dr. Hubertus Strughold was their intellectual and spiritual leader in radiation studies. He brought in Dr. Herbert Gerstner, who used prisoners during the war to study at what point human hearing is completely destroyed due to shelling, and to study the exact cause of death in cases of electrocution. These men had all experimented on prisoners in concentration camps, and were now in San Antonio doing lethal radiation experiments on American citizens for the military. Elmer Allen was designated experimental test subject Cal-13. On July 18, 1947, in a San Francisco hospital, he was injected with plutonium in the left leg. 3 days later, the leg was amputated at mid-thigh. Elmer was a porter for the Pullman Company who injured his leg while stepping off a train. He was diagnosed with a fracture that developed into a cyst. The first test for cancer was negative. A second test indicated cancer. Unable to work after the amputation, He was forced to return to Italy, Texas with his wife and 3 children. His wife recalled that he began having epileptic seizures. Quote, he would chew through the spoon, his tongue, too. Elmer began drinking heavily and told his best friend that he had been used as a guinea pig, but no one, not even his family doctor, believed him. The doctor later diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic. During an effort to collect the bodies of the people injected with plutonium, it was discovered to their amazement that 4 of them were still alive. 1 year after Elmer's death, the family was contacted by a reporter and learned that Elmer had been a human experimental subject, and the family had been lied to for 44 years. Elmer Allen died in 1991. His headstone reads Elmer Allen, 1911-1947, Cal 13, 1947-1991, one of America's nuclear guinea pigs.
I hope you will understand that just as Jewish fathers were placed in the ovens at Auschwitz, my father, Elmer Allen, was placed in his own private oven here in the United States of America. He was left there for 44 years, and the scientists occasionally took a peek inside to see if he was still alive. His survivors are pledged to tell the truth about this experiment for the next 50 or even 100 years if necessary, so that future generations will have more than lies, half-truths, and inconclusive reports when attempting to recount this real-life horror story.
While secret radiation experiments on thousands of Americans were going on in hospitals, the very public testing of nuclear weapons lasted from 1945 until the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty in 1963. Approximately 253 above-ground tests were conducted in the Pacific and continental United States, in which 200,000 military personnel took part. The atomic veterans issued the following statement. We were the victims of radiation experiments too. They exposed over 200,000 of us in over 200 atmospheric, atomic, and hydrogen bomb tests between 1945 and 1962. They deliberately bombed us with nuclear weapons and exposed us to deadly radioactivity to see how it would affect us and our equipment in nuclear warfare on land, sea, and air. They didn't need our informed consent because we were under military discipline. They devalued our lives too. They made us sterile. They crippled and killed our children. They made widows of our wives, then denied repeatedly and publicly that there was ever any danger. Say the lie often enough, and people will believe it.
Of your company?
Yes, sir, that's right.
How many of your men do you think would volunteer to go up and be in one of those foxholes when the bomb went off?
Oh, I'd volunteer to guess of about a half a dozen.
At least half a dozen?
Yes, sir.
You know, that's quite a loud noise that bomb makes when it goes off. Do you think it would do you any harm?
No, I don't think the noise would, sir, no.
How about radiation? Do you think there's much danger from radiation?
Well, radiation is the least of the worries that the men are thinking about.
I think most people thought that radiation was the greatest danger, didn't they? What did they learn
We
different?
were, prior to our instructions here, we received a very thorough briefing before we even came into close to contact with it.
A third group of experimental human subjects, besides the radiation experiment victims and the atomic veterans, are the downwinders. This term refers to all the people exposed to radiation as a result of atmospheric testing. This group in essence comprises the entire United States and in fact the entire world. Fallout from all 2,000 nuclear tests has deposited plutonium, strontium-90, and other radioactive substances in the bodies of every human being on Earth. At what point this experiment would prove fatal for all human life is unknown, but it is known that the human embryo is very vulnerable, and that 1 to 2 rads is sufficient to produce deformity or death. This much radiation and more has been deposited across the continental United States. several studies document an unexplained increase in child mortality in the U.S. that began shortly after testing began and decreased after atmospheric testing ended. The government held hearings in the 1990s and gave monetary compensation to some individuals injected with plutonium, but not the thousands of others injured in secret testing. The government's report is largely a whitewash. Few victims were compensated, and no scientist or government employee was ever punished. The institutions involved all claimed ignorance or that the patients were fully informed, which was patently false in all cases. They have largely dodged their responsibility for participating in these acts, the same acts for which the Allies hung Nazi war criminals. After the 1995 Presidential Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments submitted its final report, the children of the deceased plutonium victims had the following statements. Quote, "I guess the government really won. All the culprits that planned and executed this thing got away with it. For them to say that a little apology is enough is just beyond belief. I do feel betrayed, and I feel abused by this committee's report." Unquote. Nuclear explosions produce plutonium oxide, which is deposited in the lungs and lymph nodes and cannot be detected in the urine. The human experimental subjects were injected with a different form, plutonium citrate or plutonium nitrate, which does show up in the urine. 30 years of testing urine from those exposed in above-ground nuclear tests has led to thousands of tests that show a false negative, meaning that the tests were scientifically useless. It had all been for nothing. Mary Jean Connell, the only living victim of the plutonium experiments, when asked how she felt after receiving $100,000, merely replied, "I'm afraid it's going to happen again, you know." MKUltra was the secret CIA crash program to develop techniques to control the human mind. By the end of the Korean War, 70% of the 7,000 U.S. prisoners of war had signed confessions, 15% cooperated fully, and only 5% steadfastly refused confession or indoctrination. Professors Wolf and Hinkle submitted a secret report to Director of Central Intelligence Alan Dulles about communist methods of brainwashing that was the definitive work on the subject in 1953. It stated that no drugs or machines were used. Intense psychological pressure and human weakness were the key, beginning with solitary confinement. Guards constantly reminded the prisoner that he was totally cut off from outside support, ordered him to stand for long periods, dictated the positions allowed for sleep, waking him if he moved while sleeping, banned all outside stimuli such as books, conversation, or news of the outside world. After 4 to 6 weeks, the prisoner would break down. Quote, "He weeps, he mutters, and prays aloud in his cell." At this stage, the interrogation began in a special room. The guard told him that he knew his own crimes all too well. The prisoner is in the position of trying to prove his innocence to he knew not what. The interrogator and the prisoner bond in their shared ransacking of the captive's soul. As the interrogation proceeded, the prisoner realized that he could only end his ordeal with a full confession. Quote, "The prisoner feels that something must be done to end this. He must find a way out." According to a KGB man, more than 99% of prisoners sign a confession at this stage. Then the subject was either shot or sent to a labor camp after sentencing. Chinese techniques would move on to re-education of prisoners by moving them into a group cell for political indoctrination, incessant study of Marx and Mao. Lectures and self-criticism led to political conversion by group pressure. Prisoners demonstrated their commitment by ferociously attacking any deviations. Constant intimacy with prisoners who reviled him for his resistance pushed the prisoner beyond his emotional endurance. As the prisoner conformed, his cellmates gave increased acceptance and esteem, which reinforced his commitment to the party, for he learned that only his acceptance allowed him to live successfully in the cell. In contrast, the American mind control effort was a mini-Manhattan project, with the conviction that the keys to brainwashing lay in technology. The agency's brainwashing experts gravitated to people in the mold of the brilliant and sometimes mad scientists, obsessed by the wonders of the brain. In 1953, CIA officer Richard Helms chose Dr. Sidney Gottlieb to run the technical service staff. The TSS, through the Office of Research and Development, was given the job of developing poisons to assassinate political opponents, truth serum drugs for interrogating spies, and hypnotic techniques to create unwitting double agents, couriers, and robot assassins. Dr. Gottlieb used Nazi scientists and their state-of-the-art mind control techniques that had been perfected in concentration camps using victims of the Holocaust. General Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his personal approval to exploit the work and research of the Nazis in the death camps. The German doctors were brought to the U.S. and went to work for Project Paperclip. These men were insulated against war crimes charges. The Nuremberg prosecutors were shocked that the U.S. authorities were using German doctors despite their criminal past. Under the leadership of Dr. Strughold, 34 scientists accepted contracts from Project Paperclip and were moved to Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. These personalities began to work on human radiation studies, aviation medicine, microwave technology, and MKUltra mind control experiments. The authorization to hire these Nazi scientists came directly from the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The top military brass stated that they wished to exploit these rare minds. Operation Paperclip eventually recruited 9,000 Nazi scientists and technicians to help the U.S. destroy the USSR. Some of these scientists were known as programmers, people skilled in the art of breaking down and controlling the human mind. Dr. Joseph Mengele and others experimented extensively with children and adults using mescaline, electroshock therapy, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, torture, rape, starvation, and trauma bonding in an effort to control the human mind. Dr. Mengele was so successful using the technique of trauma bonding that survivors today still exhibit a profound affection for their torturer, referring to Mengele as Beautiful Joseph. Dr. L. Wilson Green was a Jewish doctor who the Nazis coerced to participate in their experiments at Auschwitz. This individual, whose code name was Dr. Green, came to the U.S. after World War II and began to experiment on adults and children for the military and CIA. The military and CIA copied the Nazi methodology and began numerous programs of their own. The first CIA program was known as MK-Ultra. The MK is an abbreviation for the German words for mind control. By 1953, the CIA, U.S. Navy, and U.S. Army Chemical Corps were conducting their own narco-hypnosis programs on prisoners, mental patients, foreigners, ethnic minorities, and those classified as sexual deviants. To avoid confusion, the dozens of mind control operations will be referred to generically as MK-Ultra. According to MK-Ultra documents and sources, the methodology of mind control works best when severe trauma is administered by the age of 3 years old. Severe trauma, such as rape, applied at the age of 3, will cause the personality to split or dissociate in an attempt to shield the mind from memories of events too painful to endure. The psychiatric terms are multiple personality disorder or dissociative identity disorder, and can be produced accidentally or purposefully. The Three Faces of Eve is the true story of multiple personality disorder created by childhood abuse. Psychic trauma and creation of multiple personalities was eventually codified by programmers into a standard methodology and is typically accomplished by forcing children to observe and participate in the ritual sacrifice of animals and humans, and inducing further psychic trauma by the means of rape and other horrors. The trauma causes the dissociation. This functions much like the partitioning of a hard drive in a computer. The dissociative state is used as an opening to hypnotically induce an alternate shell personality. The programmer will use hypnosis and triggers to call forth the created personality, known as an alter personality. Only 20% of the general population is easily hypnotizable, but trauma at an early age makes people vulnerable to dissociation and thus easily hypnotizable. Typically, the programmer might wear a costume, such as a rabbit suit, and sacrifice a rabbit in front of the child victims before they are physically traumatized. The image of the rabbit, a phrase from Alice in Wonderland, or similar paired images are used as the triggers to call forth the alter personality. The method works best when the trauma is repeated around 6 years of age. A few years later, the child victim's IQ test and personality test are evaluated to determine whether the child may be trained in assassination, sexual blackmail, drug courier, or other role. The subject can be hypnotized and used for operations, but would only be consciously aware of the sense of lost time. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb employed these early programmers and concentrated on the use of LSD for mind control and exotic poisons and drugs for political assassinations. He personally gave LSD to an unknowing fellow scientist, Dr. Frank Olson, who worked for the Army Chemical Corps Special Operations Division at Fort Detrick. His job was developing biological weapons. Dr. Olson committed suicide by jumping through the window of a 10th-floor hotel. Dr. Gottlieb concealed his actions, and the Olson family was unaware of the cause of his suicide until 27 years later, when the facts emerged during a congressional hearing on CIA abuses. The link between Gottlieb and Olson illustrates how the different elements of biological and chemical weapons, radiation testing, and MK-Ultra were all intertwined. Dr. Ewan Cameron was president of the American and Canadian Psychiatric Associations. He ran the Allen Memorial Institute, which was founded in 1943 with funds from the Rockefeller Foundation. Nazi paperclip scientists made their way into the CIA and military-sponsored mind control programs here in the United States and Canada. Some of these scientists were friends of Dr. Cameron. Money for Cameron's operation came from the CIA and was funneled through the Cornell Society for the Investigation of Human Ecology. The systematic annihilation or depatterning of a subject's mind and memory was accomplished with overdoses of LSD, barbiturate sleep for 65 days at a time, and electroshock therapy at 75 times the recommended dosage. Psychic driving, the repetition of a recorded message for 24 hours a day, programmed the emptied mind. The Canadian government settled a class action lawsuit by 250 former patients of Dr. Cameron decades later, but no person or institution has ever been disciplined or punished for these activities. Linda MacDonald was 25 years old in 1963 when Dr. Cameron treated her for mild postpartum depression. She received 102 electroshock therapy treatments, 80 days of drug-induced sleep, and emerged completely depatterned, essentially like a newborn, totally incontinent, unable to state her name or recognize her husband and children. She had to relearn how to drive, cook, read, and use a toilet. Eventually, unlike many of the patients of Dr. Cameron, she made a complete recovery. Cameron was the premier psychiatrist of the 20th century. He had studied Nazi scientists at the Nuremberg trials and later replicated many of their methods and sought their assistance in the race to control the human mind. Cameron's mind control experiments were one program out of many run by the CIA, Navy, Air Force, Army, and others. Although many parallel operations were occurring in the U.S., none of them was ever discovered or prosecuted. These programs were run by men of the likes of Morse Allen, Dr. L. Wilson Green, Dr. Martin Orne, Dr. Stephen Aldrich, Dr. James Hamilton. These and other American and foreign-born programmers were supervised by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who was in turn supervised by Richard Helms and Alan Dulles, the director of the Central Intelligence Agency.
I was tired, I was depressed, my back was hurting. And so he said to the children's father, why don't you go to Montreal and visit this Dr. Ewan Cameron, this famous man who has all of these accolades, and have an assessment. So we went. My medical file even says that I took my guitar with me. And that was the end of my life. Within 3 weeks, Dr. Cameron decided to call me an acute schizophrenic and ship me up to the sleep room. I was in a coma for 86 days.
86 days of unbroken sleep.
Yeah. Total comatose state. I had to be toilet trained. I was a vegetable. I had no identity. I had no memory. I'd never existed in the world before. Like a baby. Just like a baby that has to be toilet trained. Pictures, and I know who that is, who they are, but I don't remember them as my children at all. I mean, I know that they came from my body, but there's no, that's all. I don't know, and that's because I was told that. So these are my children.
Linda MacDonald would hound the federal government for 4 years before finally in 1992, Ottawa grudgingly agreed to compensate her and some of Dr. Cameron's other victims $100,000 each.
Richard Helms ran the Dirty Tricks Department after the Bay of Pigs and became Director of Central Intelligence in 1966. He destroyed the archive on MKUltra when he left in 1972 and successfully covered up the crimes of MKUltra. Helms was a product of the Eastern Establishment. His grandfather was president of the Federal Reserve. Helms, like Gottlieb, was a Machiavellian character who used paperclip scientists and would stop at nothing to win. He advocated low-intensity warfare, transmitting strategic subliminal messages to the brains of enemy populations and the use of high frequencies to affect memory and the unconscious mind. In 1964, he wrote a memo to the Warren Commission where he mentions biological radio communication, quote, cybernetics can be used in molding of a child's character, the inculcation of knowledge and techniques, the amassing of experience, the establishment of social behavior patterns, all functions which can be summarized as control of the growth processes of the individual. In 1953, MKUltra relied on LSD, but by the 1960s the emphasis had changed to biological radio communication. MKUltra had 149 sub-projects that encompassed nearly every aspect of human behavior and social science. In the 1977 Senate hearings, former CIA Director Admiral Stansfield Turner stated that the program took place at 80 institutions, including 44 universities, 15 private companies, 12 hospitals, and 3 prisons. MKUltra Subproject 119 was the foundation of all non-lethal weapons programs currently active and included a summary of 5 areas, one of which is entitled Techniques of Activation of the Human Organism by Remote Electronic Means. This memo was dated August 17, 1960, and when viewed with other evidence that was not destroyed, shows significant interest in radio frequency weapons and direct control of human behavior at a distance. By 1960, the CIA dropped emphasis on the use of LSD in favor of electronic influence. This aspect of the research is where the greatest modern emphasis has been, rather than chemical or biological agents, both of which violate existing treaties and leave physical traces. Dr. Stephen Aldrich took control of the Office of Research and Development in 1962 from Dr. Sidney Gottlieb. Aldrich started Operation Often, an investigation into the occult with the help of Houston sorceress Sybil Leek. CIA behaviorists carefully studied every aspect of the occult underground. The Scientific Engineering Institute, SEI, was a CIA cutout that had been set up in 1956 to study radar. In 1962, SEI set up a lab to study the effects of electrodes deep in the brain. In 1972, SEI also sponsored a course at the University of South Carolina in rituals of demonology and voodoo. Dr. Aldrich was an MKUltra programmer who focused on remote brain manipulation and the occult, the twin threads that run through SEI Corporation. In 1962, a CIA manual focused on radiohypnotic intracerebral control, RHIC, which was developed by the Pentagon, quote, when a part of your brain receives a tiny electrical impulse from outside sources, such as vision, hearing, etc., an emotion is produced. Anger at the sight of a gang of boys beating an old woman, for example. The same emotions of anger can be created by artificial radio signals sent to your brain by a controller. You could instantly feel the same white-hot anger without any apparent reason, unquote. Another term, electronic dissolution of memory, EDOM, refers to the ability to erase memory at a distance.
I'm Christy Nicola, born July of 1962, rendering me 32 years of age. I was a subject in radiation as well as mind control and drug experiments performed by a man I knew as Dr. Green. I was a subject from 1966 to 1976. Dr. Green performed radiation experiments on me in 1970, focusing on my neck, throat, and chest, 1972 focusing on my chest and my uterus in 1975. Each time I became dizzy, nauseous, and threw up. All these experiments were performed on me in conjunction with mind control techniques and drugs in Tucson, Arizona.
Dr. Green was using me mostly as a mind control subject from 1966 to 1973. His objective was to gain control of my mind and train me to be a spy assassin. I was in what looked like a laboratory, and there seemed to be other children. I was strapped down, naked, spread eagle, on a table, on my back. Dr. Green had electrodes on my body, including my head. He used what looked like an overhead projector and repeatedly said he was burning different images into my brain while a red light flashed aimed at my forehead. In between each sequence, he used electric shock on my body and told me to go deeper and deeper, while repeating each image would go deeper into my brain, and I would do whatever he told me to do. I felt drugged because he had given me a shot before he started the procedure. When it was over, he gave me another shot. The next thing I remember, I was with my grandparents again in Tucson, Arizona. I was 4 years old. You can see from this experiment that Dr. Green used trauma, drugs, post-hypnotic suggestion, and more trauma in an effort to gain total control of my mind. He used me in radiation experiments both for the purposes of determining the effects of radiation on various parts of my body and to terrorize me as an additional trauma in the mind control experiments. The rest of the experiments took place in Tucson, Arizona, out in the desert. I was taught how to pick locks, be secretive, use my photographic memory, and a technique to withhold information by repeating numbers to myself. Dr. Green moved on to wanting me to kill dolls that looked like real children. I stabbed a doll with a spear once after being severely traumatized, but the next time I refused. He used many pain induction techniques, but as I got older, I resisted more and more. He often tied me down in a cage, which was near his office. Between 1972 and 1976, he and his assistants were sometimes careless and left the cage unlocked. Whenever physically possible, I snuck into his office and found files with reports and memos addressed to CIA and military personnel. Included in these files were project, subproject, subject, and experiment names with some code numbers for radiation and mind control experiments, which I have submitted in your written documentation. I was caught twice, and Dr. Green ruthlessly used electric shock, drugs, spun me on a table, put shots in my stomach, in my back, dislocated my joints, and hypnotic techniques to make me feel crazy and suicidal. Because of my rebellion and growing lack of cooperation, they gave up on me as a spy assassin. Consequently, the last 2 years, 1974 to 1976, Dr. Green used various mind control techniques to reverse the spy assassin messages to self-destruct and death messages. His purpose? He wanted me dead, and I struggled to stay alive all of my adult life. I believe it is by the grace of God that I am still alive. These horrible experiments have profoundly affected my life. I developed multiple personality disorder because Dr. Green's goal was to split my mind into as many parts as possible so he could control me totally. He failed, but I've had to endure years of constant physical, mental, and emotional pain, even to this day.
Between the years of 1957 and 1984, I became a pawn in a government scheme. His ultimate goal was mind control and to create the perfect spy, all through the use of chemicals, radiation, drugs, hypnosis, electric shock, isolation in tubs of water, sleep deprivation, brainwashing, verbal, physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. I was exploited unwittingly for nearly 3 decades of my life, and the only explanations given to me were that, quote, the end justifies the means, and, quote, I was serving my country in their bold effort to fight communism. I can only summarize my circumstances by saying they took an already abused 7-year-old child and compounded my suffering beyond belief. The saddest part is, I know for a fact that I was not alone. There were countless other children in my same situation, and there was no one to help us. until now. Dr. L. Wilson Green, who claimed to have received $50 million from the Edgewood Chemical and Radiology Laboratory as part of the TSD, or Technical Science Division of the CIA, once described to Dr. Charles Brown that, quote, children were used as subjects because they were more fun to work with and cheaper, too. They needed lower profile subjects than soldiers or government people, so only young willing females would do. Besides, he said, I like scaring them. They in the agency think I'm a god, creating subjects, experiments for whatever